Good evening. Wow. All right, now I can't even see you. Maybe a little bit up, if we can. I'm Jeffrey Fleitas. Thank you for coming tonight to the last speaker, the Art of Conversation speaker series. Really appreciate everybody coming. I hope that for those who've come to the whole series, you've enjoyed it. This speaker series, this speaker series has been a fundraiser for the Cab Calloway School Fund. I'm the chair of the Cab Calloway School Fund, and not many people know about us, but for those who are associated with the school or arts education, what our job is really to help the school fund the programs that they need to fund. We all know this is a public school, but it's expensive to run an arts program, more expensive than standard public schools. And what the fund does is really support the school financially with programming, whatever they need that we can support, we try to support. So that's what this is about from the fund standpoint. I think from all of your standpoint, hopefully it's about really learning about some very interesting people. As we started this, over the last, with Maurice and then with Susan and now with Sarah, it makes me really appreciate the title, The Art of Conversation. When you think about the world today and all the social media and things of that sort, and we realize that, or for me, this has made me realize that I have a very cursory relationship with a lot of people. And a little conversation goes a long way to really know a person, understand a person, to get to know them. And I think as we think about this and think about my own life, taking some time to have a conversation is very important. And I think we're losing that as an art form today. And I think hopefully this has inspired you to have a conversation, whether it's with the person next to you, your neighbor, or anybody new, and dig a little deeper, find out who people are. So I think hopefully that's what I've learned from this, as I've learned about some of the speakers. This is our last night, and this is our last speaker, Sarah McBride, and I'm very excited. I think it's necessary, or I would like to, make sure that we thank some of the people who've helped put this on. This is an all-volunteer organization. Everybody who's helped put this on has been volunteering their time. And so I want to mention them tonight. We have not over the last two speakers, but I think I'd like to make sure they get some recognition for their work. In particular, really, our operational crew over the last few months, Kelly Furman has helped a lot with the marketing. Sally McBride, who many of you know, and a founder of the school, has been instrumental in putting this on. Will Ryder, a teacher here, has helped put a lot of the literature together. Of course, Brian Winnington, we wouldn't be able to sell tickets without him. It's for me and my computer literacy, I would not be able to sell tickets. So Brian has been very instrumental in making sure our Ticket Leap site has been going. Jamie McAdenick, and the cab crew has been running these shows, and also, the crew has been volunteering their time, and I think that's very important. At the very beginning, we had a larger body, really with the inception, and to add those names, Dana Balick, Brian Yerger, Julie Johnston, Rich Rote were all involved, and really helped us kick off the idea and make this something that I think hopefully you've all enjoyed. I know I have. Peter Furman also has helped with a lot of the original artwork, and I think the Art of Conversation, the logo that was created and we've used, hopefully we'll continue to use for years to come. I would be remiss if we didn't mention some sponsors. We had a lot of individual sponsors. They're listed in the program, but WSFS gave us some financial support, and very important for us to be able to put this on, and so I'd like to thank them. And then Bud Martin and the Delaware Theater Company were really instrumental in a number of things. For those who were here the last two, Bud was moderating. Tonight we'll have someone different, which I'll mention in a minute. But Bud really helped us get two of the speakers, and really for a group trying to figure out who to get and all of that, to have somebody like Bud jump in and basically help us make this happen was absolutely fantastic, and I'd like to thank Bud and the DTC for that support. I got to thank the speakers, right? You guys were here for Maurice and Susan and now for Sarah. All of the speakers donated their time, right? So, that's pretty incredible. And, learning about them, whether it's Maurice's stories about, getting kicked out of a swimming pool and having a famous entertainer basically say, no, he gets to swim, or listening to Susan talk about how she always knew what she wanted to do. I'm fascinated by their stories, and I'm sure I'll continue that fascination with Sarah tonight as we listen to her story. Sarah graduated from here, right? So when we think about the Cab Calloway School of the Arts, Sarah is a great example of the type of students that came through here. And, I'd be remiss if we didn't think about that. But how's that story? Sally McBride, one of the founders of the school, Sarah McBride coming through. I think it just shows what a great place this is. And, with your ticket sales here tonight, you're helping to support it. We're always looking for more and more support. So if you love what we're doing here, if you love CAB, please consider giving to the Cab Calloway School Fund so that we can continue the types of programs that we all love in terms of arts education. Thinking about next year, right? If you have enjoyed it this year, we're hoping to do it again next year. This was, the second annual Art of Conversation. We're starting to think about that. If anybody has people in mind they think would be great speakers, or know them, want to help us put it together, please reach out. We'd love to get names, contacts, anything. I think from my standpoint, we had a lot of learning this year. Hopefully it'll be easier next year, but it's been highly entertaining for me to really learn more about these speakers, and I'd love to get another group just as inspiring as this group. So please, if you know anybody, let us know, but please look for tickets next fall and come back. So with that, I won't take too much more of your time. I know you're all here to see Sarah, but interviewing or moderating for Sarah tonight, if you don't know him, probably the most beloved teacher here at CAB, one of the founding teachers here at CAB, a Teacher of the Year, Delaware State Teacher of the Year winner, and really, as he told me, again, that Art of Conversation, just talking to him a few minutes, one of his most proudest things was heading down to Haiti after the earthquake with some other Delawareans and starting up a school. So his story would also be inspiring to listen to, but we're lucky to have him interviewing tonight. Mr. Maz, I'm going to introduce him in just a second, but let me mention that he's known Sarah since she was 2, right? So how cool is it that we're going to have somebody that knows Sarah intimately to do this interview so that we can really, really learn about Sarah's life. So I'm really excited to have Mr. Maz, and if you guys would join me in welcoming him out here. Thank you, Mr. Maz.
Can you hear me? Are we good? Okay. We were good. There you go. Okay. First of all, thank you and welcome. Welcome to the Art of Conversation. Tonight, we're going to be hearing, as you've been told, from our third and final speaker. Now, tonight's an extra special event. Okay, it's extra special. It's kind of a homecoming of sorts. It's not only special because our guest speaker is the National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign, and she's a graduate of the American University where she served as student body president, and our special guest was the first transgender person to ever speak at a Democratic National Convention. Go ahead, that deserves an applause. And although All of those accomplishments are remarkable. That's not the reason why tonight is so special. Tonight is so special because our guest, she's family. She holds a warm spot in the hearts of all of our Cab community. She holds memories for all of us. I've known her since she was 2 years old, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But she's just an amazing person. You'll see a lot that she's going to tell us. However, tonight we gather here to hear her talk about her book. Tomorrow will be different. And did I neglect to tell you that somewhere in all those accomplishments, she found the time to write a book? I can't even text my mom, and she's writing books. So, and I don't even want to tell you her age because it's not polite to tell a lady's age, but she's a lot younger than me. So yeah, that's just amazing. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have not already read Sarah's book, perhaps you're a transgender person. Maybe you know somebody who's transitioning. Or perhaps you just want to be a better ally to the LGBTQ community. I want to promise you this. If you read Sarah's book, and this isn't a plug to buy her book, because I'll lend you mine if you want. You can just read it and give it back to me, okay? But it would be nice if you bought it. However, reading Sarah's book will allow you to consider the experience of transgender people in a way you perhaps never have before. So open your books, open your hearts, sit back, and enjoy this evening. It's my pleasure, it's my honor to introduce to you at this time, Sarah Elizabeth McBride. Can you hear me? Ooh, this is dangerous because you don't know how bad I want to break into like a Dreamgirls song right now. You don't give a
every day in class.
You don't give a frustrated singer a microphone. Okay. Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much. I read your book twice. I read nothing twice, and I probably would not have read this book twice. However, I read it for pure enjoyment. It was amazing. But then your mom, who I cannot say no to, thank goodness this whole thing is over tonight because I know I'd be coming up here from Lewis every other week for Sally. However, I read it a second time because I knew I was asked to do the interview, and I knew that this was important. And so thank you first for writing the book. It was amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and it's an honor to be here with you. Mr. Maz was one of my favorite teachers when I was a student here, and it's just such an honor to be on stage with the 2011 Delaware Teacher of the Year.
That's the gift that keeps on giving. The 2011, yeah. I'll be 106, and people say, here's a 2011 Teacher of the Year. But anyway, that was an honor. Okay, so I've known Sarah since she was 2, so you're probably thinking, did he teach nursery school? How does he know her since she's 2? Do I have your permission to tell the story?
Unfortunately, yes.
You sure? Okay, well, as you know, Sally McBride had started the school. And I was kind of behind her the whole time, rooting her on, and as long as someone else was doing all the work, I was like, yes, let's do this. This is amazing. So Sally came to my classroom, and she was with Sarah's older brother, who was Sean. And Sean was going to be in 6th grade, so there's 10 years difference. So Sarah was 2. And Sally and I were talking, and I wasn't paying too much attention to Sarah, and all of a sudden I look in the back and I said, oh, Sally, we have a little problem in the back of the room. She turned around, and Sarah was standing there, disrobed all the way down to her underoos, and they were coming off. So Sally was beet red. And you know, I hope this is appropriate, but I think you may have been trying to tell us something way back then. What do you think?
Trying to get out of those clothes. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Okay. All right. That's true, though, right?
I have not done that since, I promise you.
Okay, but all kidding aside, Cab Calloway is an amazing school. You know that, and I know that. So I'd like to start this conversation with, tell us about Cab and how did we do? How did we do setting you out in this world, and what was your experience going to a school that's so open, and how did that affect you?
Well, first off, I would be here in an instant for this, but I'm sure, like so many people here, I can't say no to my mother. So it is so exciting to be part of this event at Cab, because for me, Cab really has been at the center of my life from the start. From coming here in the early 90s with my mom helping to start this school, literally working in the front office, ordering textbooks for your classes, to coming here in 6th grade in 2002, all the way through high school, and then to this day. Because when you're part of the Cab family, you are part of the Cab family for life. The last time I was in this theater for an anniversary for the school, it was the 10th anniversary. I was sitting in a probably decomposing seat over to my right, and my mother is welcomed on stage. She is announced as the founder of the school. She's given an award. No one in my class, in my 6th grade class, had known this. And Jillian Early turns around and says to me, "Well, now we know how you got into this school." And it's probably true. I had absolutely no talent. But you know, Cab was a place that, from an early age, really underscored for me the power of diversity, the power of inclusion, that when you create a learning environment where everyone feels welcomed and affirmed and respected in who they are, young people can truly pursue their dreams. And you know, when I was here as a student, I was still in the closet. It was 2002 through 2009, and it was sort of well before this transgender tipping point. But it was through these experiences at Cab that I was able to build a support network that when I did come out, eventually during my junior year of college, I was met with nothing but love and support. And that started with my parents, but it really was amplified and enhanced by this network of love that was truly a reflection of the values of Cab Calloway, the experience that I had here. And I can't imagine how different my experience would have been had I gone to any other school. And I always said, when I was student body president at AU, that our schools should look like the country we want to build in 10 or 15 years. And I think there is no better school in this state than Cab Calloway when it comes to building the kind of world we want to build, a world where you can be gay, you can be trans, you can be black, you can be anything that this society says is mutually exclusive with dreaming big dreams. But you have a place here, you can be seen, you will be loved, and you will be respected as the equal person that we all are.
Can I get an amen? Yes. And it was equally as wonderful to teach here. So I second that.
He taught me practically all of the SAT words that I didn't do well. I got probably a 300, but all of the 300 points were all from Joe Maz's law words.
That's not a sparkling endorsement right there.
I was in 6th grade.
Okay. All right, let's get started. Here we go. What I would like to start with is, in your book, you talk about your neighbors. You had a couple girlfriends across the street, and you talked about they had Disney princess dresses. And there was one in particular, it was a blue, shiny Cinderella dress. And you would go over there, and you'd put the dress on. And you said that you felt at home. You said you felt really comfortable, and you felt sad when you had to take it off. And you just knew then that putting that dress on was where you belonged. Can you, because some people, it may be hard to understand at such a young age how you knew that was something good. Can you tell us more?
You know, every transgender person's journey is a little bit different. No two journeys are the same. But for me, I've known that I'm transgender my entire life. From my earliest memories, I can remember lying in my bed at night, praying that I would wake up the next day and be myself. I didn't know that there was anyone else like me. I didn't know that there was anything I could do about it, but I knew who I was. It wasn't that I knew I was different. I quite literally knew I was a girl. And I think one of the challenges we have in the fight for trans equality, which differs from the fight for gay rights, is that most people who are straight can understand what it feels like to love or to lust. And so they're able to enter into conversations around sexual orientation with a degree of empathy or analogous experience that allows them to understand, and through understanding, build a degree of passion for gay rights that I think is more difficult for trans rights, because most people who aren't transgender, we term as cisgender, most people who are cisgender do not have an analogous experience to having a gender identity that differs from your sex assigned at birth. And I think that makes it very difficult for people to wrap their minds around. And I remember as I was sort of trying to struggle with finding the words to describe that experience, particularly when I was coming out to my parents, the best phrase that I could use to describe that pain of being unseen, of not being affirmed and respected in who I knew I is a constant feeling of homesickness, an unwavering ache in the pit of my stomach that would only go away when I could be seen and affirmed as myself. And with geographic homesickness, that feeling typically dissipates with time and getting used to your new surroundings. But for me and for so many transgender people, that pain only grew with time. And I knew that I was transgender. I knew who I was, not because I just wanted to wear dresses. It was a deeper feeling than that. It was a feeling, a piece of information that I knew as well as I know that I love my parents. And it was in putting that Cinderella dress on across the street. Actually, I think Mrs. Seitz is here, Courtney and Stephanie Seitz's house. And in their playroom, putting that dress on, that pain that I didn't fully understand would go away. And a completeness and a sort of almost just clear mind would occur. And when I eventually came out and transitioned, people would always say, I hope you're happy, I hope you're happy. But I didn't transition to be happy. And that feeling that I had when I put that Cinderella dress on, it wasn't a happiness, it wasn't a euphoria. I transitioned, I came out, I took the steps to live my truth, not to create a positive, but to remove a negative. And for the first time, right after I came out, my mind was finally free. And when I would put that dress on when I was 4 or 5 years old, my mind finally felt free. But of course, the proverbial stroke of midnight would occur, and I'd have to take that dress off and go back to playing that part that society expected of me.
Before we did this interview, I watched several of Sarah's interviews, pretty much to find out what to wear, because I wanted to try to be hip, a little hip, but it didn't work. However, somebody referred to Sarah's book as Transgender 101. And I thought that was a great way to refer to that, because I learned so much when I read her book. And just what you said, I totally understood what you said from reading your book. So that was a very poignant moment for me in the book. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to when you decided on Christmas morning to come out to your parents and tell them that you were a transgender female. And, so to speak, after the dust settled, your mom said to you, okay, Sarah, let me get this clear. Let me make sure I'm right with this.
She said it through a lot of tears.
Okay,
a lot of tears.
I can imagine. And she said, so you want to be a girl. And Sarah, you said to your mom, no, I am a girl. I found that very interesting, because being a part of the cisgender population, I can see where most parents would respond with that remark saying, okay, so you want to be a girl, but you knew you were a girl. And I think most people look and say, okay, there's the boy, fits, that's the boy, that's the girl. But you didn't fit that, but you still knew that you were a girl. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, and I think it's a sort of natural inclination to use that kind of language, because, from my community's perspective, I was the one changing. But the reality is that my gender identity existed before I expressed it to the world and before the world was able to see it. Gay people aren't straight before they come out as gay, and transgender people are the gender identity they identify with even before they come out. It is something that exists in our heart and in our mind long before we're able to utter those words, I'm transgender. And I think it's difficult for folks. One of the questions I get is, and one of the questions my dad had for me was, how do you have this deeply held sense of something that is a social construct? And I think that's a really important question. And for me, gender is a lot like language. Language is a social construct. Language was created by humans, but it was created by humans to express very real things, including very real emotions and feelings. The feeling of happiness is a real emotion. It is a deeply held emotion. But the word happiness is a social construct. And just as with the emotion of happiness, where there are almost an infinite number of ways to express that feeling, the same is true with gender. And I think we have to get to this space where we can recognize that everyone, transgender or cisgender, has a deeply held sense of their own gender identity. You don't have to think about it much if the world perceives your gender identity to be the same as the one you feel. But everyone has a deeply held sense of their gender identity. And, for me, one of the things I want people to understand is that I've always been who I am. I'm just now being seen by the world as the person that I've always been. And I think there's a unique pain in being unseen. It's one of the most dehumanizing and demoralizing experiences that a person can have. But then there's a unique sense of joy when you've been unseen for your entire life and you are finally able to take that step to be seen in who you are. And, for me, when I was able to take that step, I thought, quite simply, this is exactly how everyone else has always felt. I was so distracted by my gender identity. I thought about it every single waking hour of every single moment. And the moment that I was able to transition, I thought, wow, this is the world seen through everyone else's eyes. Now, I also think, I think when we talk about that transition, one of the things that is important to recognize is that even though I knew who I was, my gender identity existed long before I came out, I was perceived as the world by the world as a man. My experience of sort of being perceived as a man was different than everyone else because I was internalizing messages in a way that people who are cisgender men are not internalizing. But I was perceived, and I did benefit from a number of privileges that men in our society benefit from. And when I came out, I talk about I came out of the closet only to find myself stuck in the kitchen. Because when I came out, I entered this world that wasn't just structured in a way to put up barriers in front of transgender people, but is structured in a way that put up barriers toward women regardless of whether they're transgender. The world of double standards and contradictions, a world that treats you like both a delicate infant and a sexualized idol in the exact same moment. And figuring out how to navigate this world, as both a transgender person and as a woman, was a truly eye-opening experience for me.
Wow, thank you. I think you're blowing the doors off that kitchen. Yeah, I don't think you're coming out of that kitchen. I think you're blowing the doors off of it. Okay, your relationship with Andy was a huge part of the book. As soon as you hear the word Andy, get tissues. It's just, when you have the book, I'm just telling you that, get tissues. That was a huge part of your book. And I have to tell you, I was wrecked. The entire part that dealt with his illness, I was a wreck. And then, this is when he passed, I felt a sense of loss. I really did. I felt a sense of loss. And I never met Andy. I loved you, but I never met Andy. And I walked around feeling like there was a dark cloud over, that day. I just felt really sad. And I want to say, first of all, thank you for writing that. Thank you for being so vulnerable. And my condolences, because I know that was not easy to write, but it's such a poignant part of your book. And what I'd like you to do is a little two-part question here. One is just talk to us what Andy meant to you, okay? And also, after his passing, how did your advocacy change? Because there seemed to be a sense of urgency after he passed. And can you tell us why?
Well, Andy was truly the best person I've ever known. He exuded a degree of compassion and kindness that was almost superhuman. I mean, in everything he did, kindness and compassion guided the way. You know, he wasn't perfect, and he wouldn't want me to canonize him in his death, but he was truly about as good as it really can get. He was someone who taught me how to love and be loved. He was someone who taught me how to live the values I fight for at work in my own life. You know, I think so often when we go into politics or when we go into advocacy, or even when we're just observing politics or observing advocacy, we lose our sense of kindness and compassion for other people. The kindness and compassion might motivate us into that field, but we lose it when we enter into the conversation, and it almost becomes a sort of a sport without principle. And one of the things that Andy always demonstrated, and something he taught me in everything he did, was that the only way to be effective in your advocacy is to center it in compassion and kindness and in certain first principles. And I think one of the most profound lessons that Andy taught me, and I talk about this conversation in the book, is we were having a conversation around the debate about whether people should out anti-LGBTQ politicians who are actually in the closet. And my instinct was to out people. My instinct was one of vengeance. I thought, you out these people, you push them out of office, and you know, reveal their hypocrisy. And Andy sort of stopped me, and he said to me, that might be the easy approach. That might feel viscerally good. But I'm not going to fight for a world where every person can live their sexual orientation and gender identity the way they need to by abridging that right for anyone. And if the principle we are fighting for is not an unbreakable first principle, then what is? And you know, he sort of drove home the point by saying, what if you outed a person for hypocrisy? You can always find altruistic reasons to violate a principle, but that's when principles matter the most. And what if you violated that principle and the person did something to themselves, they harmed themselves? Is that really the appropriate punishment for hypocrisy? And so, you know, in every instance, Andy was someone who really was able to drive home these lessons, and he taught me how to advocate. He taught me how to go into the world and meet even unimaginable hate with a level of compassion and kindness that I believe in the long run will be met. You mentioned the sense of urgency from his passing. I will say that there is nothing in my life that will ever be more important than the last month of Andy's life. We came into each other's lives in probably the perfect moments for one another. He sort of helped walk me into my transness and my womanhood, while I sort of walked him to his death. And in that last month, you know, you're told when someone's passing away to cherish every moment, and each moment felt both precious but also excruciating at the same time. And after he passed away, after several weeks after his terminal diagnosis, he passed away from cancer. And after he passed away, I went through the different stages of grief. I went through sadness and disbelief. But then I landed on anger. And I'm not an angry person by nature. Petty anger seems like such a waste of energy to me. But that's not the only type of anger that exists. There's also righteous anger, the kind of anger that, when coupled with hope and a mission, throughout our history has changed the world. And after Andy passed away, I was angry that he had only had a quarter of his life as his authentic self. He had come out at a relatively young age. He was supposed to have 3/4 of his life living his truth, but because of these circumstances, he had less than a quarter. But we know so many people have even less time than that. And every single time we ask transgender people or gay people or any person of a marginalized background to sit back and allow a slow conversation to take place before we treat them with respect, We are asking that person to watch their one life pass by without the dignity and fairness that every person deserves. And that is too much to ask of anyone. And so his passing underscored for me what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now, that every single day matters in this fight, that time is of the essence. We can always find hope, we can always find ideas, we can always find inspiration, but time is the one resource none of us can afford to waste. You talked a little bit about how difficult it was to write about the experiences with Andy, and it was incredibly difficult, but it was also a blessing to be able to re-experience all of the positive times I had with him. But it was also a blessing in many ways. I wrote the book after the election, and I was feeling pretty hopeless and dispirited. And in reliving that experience, and in remembering the lessons from Andy's life, I almost went on a journey back to hope. During the last month of Andy's life, my brother Sean, who's a radiation oncologist, he said to me, "This is going to be incredibly difficult, but take stock in acts of amazing grace that you see all around you." And that grace was truly everywhere. The miracle of our friends putting together a wedding for us on our rooftop in 5 days, to the miracle of Andy surviving to our wedding when by all accounts he should have passed away. That grace was present in all things. There was such beauty in tragedy. And in reliving that experience and in reflecting on those lessons, it reminded me that all of us, even in the darkest moments and the most troubling times, can bear witness to acts of amazing grace. That hope only makes sense as an emotion. Hope only makes sense in the face of hardship. And for me, as tragic as that was, being able to find that beauty in that tragedy, being able to understand that even in those dark moments, there is amazing grace and there is hope, that has helped transform my advocacy, and it has reminded me that through those acts of quiet courage and amazing grace, all of us have continued to make history, open hearts, and move equality forward, no matter who's president, no matter the challenges we're facing.
Thank you. Your voice in the book changes after his passing. You can tell. Just reading the book, there's this urgency in the book, and I felt hope. I felt hope. You know, I was so sad, but I also did feel hopeful because I said, okay, I'm finishing this book because I know Miss Sarah is going to tear it up, and you're tearing it up. Okay, so thank you for that. At age 13, okay, this is little while ago, not quite as far back for me, but at age 13, you were sitting in front of your television. You wrote this in the book, and you were watching Barack Obama deliver a speech at the Democratic National Convention. Probably the speech that introduced a lot of us to him. I know it was the first time I had seen him speak. And you had said to yourself, wow, I really hope someday I can vote for this man. And 12 years later, 12 years later, you were asked to speak at the Democratic National Convention. Barack Obama was our president. I just want you to tell us about the importance of those 360 words. Because when I found out it was 360 words, I just couldn't imagine that task. And what's the importance of that to you?
Well, it's a reflection of the fact that I'm not an important person, and they gave me a very short period of time on stage. You know, it's a lot harder to write something really short than it is to write something really long, and particularly when you're standing on stage and you feel a degree of responsibility, which I felt, to utilize that moment to make an impact, to change the way people might be thinking about an issue they're hearing about. And more importantly, for me, frankly, to do my community proud, to do justice by the trans community, because for decades, the trans community was either completely ignored, or if we were present in any conversation, we were mocked. And I knew that that moment on that stage would be the first time for many transgender people that they were seeing their identities, their lives, and our cause celebrated and affirmed on such a massive platform. And I will never forget those 4 minutes on that stage. It was truly surreal. Right before I went on stage, someone said to me, "No one is going to be listening to you." Everyone gets here 5 hours beforehand to watch the main speaker that night. It was Thursday night. It was Hillary's speech. No one's going to be listening to you. They're going to be milling about. They're going to be talking. And the instinct for speakers is to start shouting, to invite the audience into their speech. But that looks terrible on television. And they're like, you will look unhinged. You will look not the way you want to present. And you're not giving the speech to the arena. You're giving the speech to the people watching on television and to people potentially watching in the days and years to come. And I was so nervous. I thought, there's no way I'm going to strike that balance. Everyone's going to be talking, and my instinct is going to be to try to invite everyone in. But when they announced that I was coming out on stage with the LGBT caucus, which is the caucus on the Hill, Capitol Hill, that had invited me to speak with them, for the first time that night, the arena started to really applaud. And for the first time that night, they started to listen. And it wasn't about me. They had no idea who I was, but they knew that this was a moment, that this was a first, that there were transgender people in that arena and hundreds of thousands probably watching on television for whom that moment meant the world to them. And the whole time, they light the arena incredibly well. The whole time I was speaking, I could see my parents standing in the audience, right under the Delaware delegation sign, standing next to Chris Coons. And I remember thinking on that stage, you were so scared when I came out. You were so worried about rejection in every sense of the word, and I hope right now that you know that at least for me, it's going to be okay. And my hope when I got off that stage was that there would be people across this country, transgender people, transgender youth, parents of trans youth, who maybe felt a little bit more hope that for their child, things were changing and that they would be okay too. And I think as we move into this sort of different political situation, to put it mildly.
That is a situation. Now we've got a situation here.
That's the most muted way of describing what's happening right now. I try to always remember that feeling in that arena, the fact that there are tens of thousands of people who are in that arena and millions of people across this country who are watching, who are applauding, who are celebrating our lives, and who are declaring very clearly that our cause was their cause. And no matter the challenges we face, that alliance of friends and family and of allies that is there with us in unprecedented numbers, and that doesn't change.
I can tell you, there was dancing on coffee tables in my house that night.
That's every night in your house.
Well, no, was it? Well, that's true, but this time my partner joined me. He's the calm one, but he was dancing on the coffee table too.
That's saying something. That's an occasion.
Calm down, you. I got more questions to ask. All right. Sally, can you come up here now? Okay. Thank you, Sally. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
Mom.
I don't really
Thanks.
want to ask this next question, but I have to bring it up. And it's about the HB2 bill. And it's better known as, for lack of anything else, the bathroom bill. Everybody gets hung up on the whole bathroom issue. But before I ask the question, this is the one part of your book that I found it was ironic, because in 1993, I went to my first gay and lesbian march. It wasn't even LGBTQ then, it was just lesbian and gay march. And I was so excited to be at this huge gay march. And when I got out of the car, the very first sign I saw was, "Save our children, fire perverted gay teachers." And I looked at that, and I can remember, I get choked up thinking about it now. I remember thinking, wow, that's what they think of me. They think I'm a pervert. This is unbelievable. So my question for you is, with the HB2 bill and all the hate that's being spewed and the fear, do you think that maybe it's your turn now? You know, like, okay, let's do something to the trans because the gay people now are fine. You know what I mean? I mean, is that what it is?
I think that's a lot of it. I think that what we see is that
Because I didn't get fired, by the way. I never got fired.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I think what we see is that for each generation, there is a boogeyman or boogie person that the far, far, far right wing always sets their sights on. And they do it for a number of different reasons. But right now, one of the boogeymen of the right are transgender people. It's also Muslims and immigrants and people of color and women and those living at the intersection of all of those identities. But right now, it's transgender people. And you talk about the arguments you saw in the 90s. You take out gay and you enter in trans, and it is the exact same arguments we're seeing right now. That if we protect, in the 90s they were saying, if we protect gay people from discrimination, if we allow gay people to be teachers, it will open up our schools to people coming in to molest children. And they're saying the exact same thing right now with trans people in bathrooms. If we protect transgender people from discrimination and harassment and violence in restrooms, we will open up a Pandora's box of people being able to go into restrooms to commit what are illegal actions and remain illegal actions. And the reality is people keep asking me, why do we talk about bathrooms? Why are we hearing so much about bathrooms? And the reality is, one, transgender people would rather not be talking about bathrooms. We'd rather be talking about dignity and fairness throughout daily life. But the reality is also that bathrooms have been at the center of every conversation for civil and human rights through the last 60 years. From the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, to the push for the Equal Rights Amendment in the 70s, to the fight for gay rights in the 80s, to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in the 90s, to the fight for transgender rights right now, anti-equality politicians and activists have always tried to focus the debate in on bathrooms. And they do it for two reasons. The first is that everyone feels a little bit vulnerable in restrooms, which means when you talk about what is perceived as a policy change in restrooms, that vulnerability makes people far more cautious for any perceived change. But the second is more insidious than that, and it goes beyond political messaging. The real reason why they keep talking about bathrooms is because they understand that if they lose on every single issue, on every single other aspect of life, employment, housing, other public spaces, if they are able to win in the fight on bathrooms, it becomes the closest thing to a silver bullet to legislating discrimination and legalizing discrimination throughout daily life. Because if you cannot access a restroom safely and easily that makes sense for you, it becomes much more difficult to go to work. It becomes much more difficult to go to school. It becomes nearly impossible to leave your house for more than a few hours. And so these efforts like HB2, are nothing more than a thinly veiled effort to push transgender people out of public life and into the shadows. And I am thoroughly confident that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, if we're not already feeling this way right now, we will look back on these debates and wonder why the hell this was even a conversation. And we will regret that we took any time in a conversation around something that is just so factually inaccurate, it is rooted in misconceptions. Delaware, for instance, passed gender identity non-discrimination protections in 2013, and there hasn't been some epidemic of people committing crimes in restrooms. Everything continued to go on as normal. The only change that happened was that transgender people are treated with a little bit more dignity, a little bit more respect, and in the event that they aren't, they have a recourse and a remedy to the discrimination they face. And that should be a reality in every place across this country. It should be a reality in every school in this state. It should be a reality for every person, no matter their zip code, no matter their state, because at the end of the day, equality should not be based on where you live.
And it is. It's true. It's always who's the next or what's the next person or that where are we going to spew this hate next. So thank you for that. In your book, okay, I'm going to read this quote. I memorized it, but I know right in the middle of it I'll mess it up, so I'm just going to read it right off the card, okay? I'm not taking any chances at this age here. In your book, you mentioned Dr. King's quote, The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. You've already mentioned that this administration is not as LGBTQ friendly as the Obama administration. I think in the Obama administration, he was probably one of the first presidents ever to mention the word gay in a speech, or transgender in a speech. Because of that administration, I was able to marry the man that I've been with for 18 years. Now it kind of seems, like we're standing still, or even perhaps going backwards a little bit, the ban on transgender serving in the military. This is a two-parter, but you can combine it. Like, what do you think about that, about standing still or going backwards? And do you feel like Dr. King's quote is still relevant?
I do. I think that people misunderstand the quote that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. I think they misunderstand the quote because they think that that arc bends inalterably and without effort towards justice. But the reality is that journey toward a more perfect union, it happens because of hard work, it happens because of people speaking out, and it happens in fits and starts. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But what I feel like I have seen over the last year and a half is that every single time they come for us, every single time they try to roll back the clock on our progress, we end up having a conversation with this country that serves to open hearts, change minds, and in the end sows the seeds of the destruction of the politics of hate that they seek to implement. I remember when the president tweeted his ban on transgender people serving openly in the military. It was in July. And when the ban came out, polling was roughly 50-some% of Americans opposed the effort, opposed the president's ban. A majority, but a small majority. In just 5 days, that number went from the low 50s to 60-something%. And that was because when they come for us, they elevate an issue. They always overestimate just how much this country hates us. They really do. And they overestimate the degree of hatred that exists in this world. It is a problem, and it is far too prevalent. But I think they've overplayed their hand. And they have actually, in the end, pursued policies that will only serve to make us stronger in the end. And I think that that's true for the trans community. I think it's true for the broader LGBTQ community. And my hope is that it is true across the board for marginalized people across this country. That these attacks are the last gasp of a dying movement. And that they will, 50 years down the road, be seen as the catalyst for conversations and movements that will not just defeat the politics of hate, but in the end will deliver the kind of opportunity and equality that every person deserves.
So the arc bends, but it's not bending by itself. We've got to bend it. We have to.
And it's an overarching trend.
Right.
But it's not. That doesn't mean that over 150 years, does it bend towards justice? Yes. But every 10 or 15 years doesn't necessarily mean that it's always bending the same way.
Good. Thank you. Okay, growing up in Wilmington, you had a lot of role models, okay? Now, these role models, I mean, I had Diana Ross and Burt Reynolds, okay? They were my role models. I wanted to be
Who
a
are they?
Supreme, yeah, and I wanted to marry Burt Reynolds. So, yeah, there's a big difference
Sounds
here.
like my experience, too.
Yeah, there's a big difference. I didn't do either. However, your role model was Jack Markell, Beau Biden, and then Vice President Joe Biden.
That's a lot of white men. Jeez.
It's all right. And Joe Biden even wrote the foreword for your book. But this question's not about them, although I just wanted to point out that because Delaware is such a small state and because you're so amazing, you were able to work with them. They influenced you. I believe that they probably made you, in the political realm, where you are today, a lot of your thought processes. But I think you're becoming a role model. And I think it's happening quickly. When I was online, I was looking up your name, and I was like, what? There was so much out there. And I know anybody can see your videos. So first of all, how do you deal with that? That's a big responsibility. How do you deal with that? And second is, what's your message for the young folks? Like, let's say there's a little transgender person sitting in the audience right now, and they're saying, wow, just like when you put on your princess dress, and they're saying, hey, what would you say?
Well, first, I'll say on the Delaware point that you made, I probably am even prouder to be a Delawarean than I am a trans person. I'm very proud to be a trans person, but I think being a Delawarean is at the heart of my identity, and that's because of those formative experiences with Jack and Bo and so many people in this state who demonstrated to me at an early age that my voice mattered. I think one of the great things about living in Delaware, being a small state, we see that one voice can have make an outsized difference and have an outsized influence. And I think I've seen that throughout my life. And I think one of the reasons why I feel so hopeful is because of the experiences I had here in Delaware growing up, being a student here at Cab, being a volunteer and eventually an intern and then staffer for people like Jack and Bo. I feel hopeful because I have seen that when you have those conversations, when you do show up, you can make real change. And I think Delaware has a unique role and responsibility because we are one of a handful of states in this country where there is a Democratic majority in both chambers in the state legislature and a Democratic governor. And we have a responsibility to be at the forefront of progressive change in this country. It's not going to happen in Washington, and in far too many states, there's no chance. But Delaware is one of a few states in this nation that can be at the forefront, and if we can change Delaware, then we can transform this nation. One of the greatest privileges of my job at the Human Rights Campaign is I get to travel around the country, and I get to meet so many young transgender people. I don't know if I'm a role model. I think in many cases their parents know who I am, but they probably don't know who I am. But what is amazing to me is that there are young transgender people who are growing up, and they can turn on their television. They can see a transgender person winning an Oscar or an Emmy. They can see a transgender person standing on stage at the convention. They can see a transgender person being elected to one of the nation's oldest state legislatures. When I was a little kid, I had no possibility models. I had no one who was quite like me. In fact, one of the first things I realized as I read about politics and history was that despite the fact that the pages were filled with social change, no one quite like me had ever made it very far. And I wondered whether the heart of this country was big enough to love someone like me. One of the great things that I get to experience is that there are young transgender people across this country who are able to wake up in the morning or go to sleep at night and know much better than I ever knew that there is a place for them here, that their lives matter and that their identities are worth celebrating. When I was a little kid, the notion of living my truth and dreaming big dreams would have seemed mutually exclusive. The words would not have even made sense together. But there are tens of thousands of transgender people across this country, transgender young people across this country, who are both living their truth and dreaming big dreams all at the same time. I met a young transgender girl in North Carolina a couple weeks ago, and when I asked her what she wants to be, she said that she's going to be an astronaut when she grows up. I mean, the fact that there are young transgender people who are literally reaching for the stars.
Well, you're going to be president. Come on.
Oh, God.
Come on. 2040. Let's get the signs, people. 2040.
But the fact that there are these young transgender people that exist today, that they even exist today, demonstrates how far we've come. That we have transformed impossibility into reality. And whenever I meet a young transgender person, I try to tell them two things. One is that you are the best expert on who you are. You know who you are and what you need better than anyone else. There's no right or wrong way to be yourself. There's no wrong path, there's no wrong journey if you're transgender. Do what you know in your heart you need to do for yourself, to be safe, to protect your well-being. You are the best expert on who you are. But the second thing I try to share with them is a fact that I have learned through my advocacy. And frankly, it's been through the hate that I have experienced through my advocacy. I remember after I took a selfie in a bathroom in North Carolina in 2016, right after HB2 was passed in North Carolina, the first couple hundred comments were positive, but then the comments started coming in that were much more negative. Comment after comment after comment of people telling me to kill myself. Areas in the dark web where the alt-right would sort of organize, threaten to do things to me that should never see the light of day. And after that experience, I wondered, do I have the courage to do this? Am I comfortable doing this? I'm going to have to choose between doing what I'm passionate about and being happy, because I will be miserable with this kind of hate. And I thought for a couple weeks about this, and I did a lot of research, and I came across a couple lessons, a couple stories that highlighted something for me that completely changed the way I experience hate, and is something that I try to convey to every single young LGBTQ person I meet. And that is that every single person deals with an insecurity. Every single person deals with something that society has told them they should be ashamed of, whether it's their sexual orientation or gender identity, or whether it's how they look, how they sound, where they come from, what they do, any host of different characteristics or attributes. The thing about LGBTQ people is that we have conquered that insecurity. We have conquered our biggest fears. We have taken that fact that society has told us we should be ashamed of, and we've not only accepted it, but oftentimes walked forward from a place of pride. And the bullies, they see that. They see that power, and they are jealous of it. And what I want every single LGBTQ person, particularly LGBTQ young person, to know is that you are powerful. You are powerful just by being. And I think if we can carry that power with us, if we can understand that inherent power that we have in ourselves, we can carry that comfort with us from the scariest of places to the safest of spaces.
Well, I think our LGBTQ community is fortunate to have you, and you are a role model. You are absolutely a role model. And this question leads right into that, and I want to ask this because I think it's, you'll tell us why it's important, but in your book, when you were an intern in the White House, you worked with a few people, and then later on you found out through someone else that the person you had worked with had said, oh, I don't know any transgender people. I've never met any transgender people. And they had worked with you. And at first, you were very surprised. And then you were a little disappointed. And then you kind of said, okay, well, this has to change. My feeling was this at first, and then I got it after I read the rest of the book. But, you know, when I first came out, this hardly ever happened, but when somebody thought I was straight, I was like, thank you very much. You know, that never happened, but once in a while, I was like, you're daggone right. But why not they pass, right?
Yeah.
And why go through all that? Tell us the importance of that.
Well, you know, I was interning at the White House, and it was just a couple months after I'd come out. It was probably 6 months after I'd come out, and I had sort of navigated the world with this constant perception that everyone was perceiving me as transgender, and was sort of making all of the decisions in my life, from the little decisions to the big decisions as you're going about your day, based on that perception. And then when this one colleague standing in the elevator with me, at the time I was wearing a wig because my hair wasn't, I didn't feel comfortable with where my hair was, and when I said that I had a wig on, she looked confused and clearly didn't know that I was trans, and I explained to her that I was trans, and her eyes lit up, and she says, well, I guess that makes a bit more sense. My heart sank. And I went home and I didn't quite understand it. And you know, someone said, well, did you feel like you were deceiving them? And no, that's not the case. I was being perceived as a woman, and I am a woman, and there's no deception in that. They just weren't seeing one part of my identity. And I realized that I was disappointed because I'm proud of the fact that I'm transgender. I am proud of the fact that I've had this journey. I am a better, stronger person because of the experiences that I've had because I'm transgender. And I get to be part of a community that is beautiful, brilliant, and brave, and that is finally being seen in our authenticity. And I was disappointed that She didn't realize that I was trans because I was proud, and our identities matter. The collection of our identities make us who we are. And I wanted her to know that I was who I am because it was one of the proudest things that I had ever done. I had conquered that big insecurity. And being able to blend in, being stealth, which is the term you used and we use in the community, that is a privilege. It can protect you and shield you from discrimination and violence. There's no question about that. And for a while, and even to this day, I do feel better when someone says, oh, I couldn't tell you were transgender, or you don't look transgender, because we have been told that being perceived as transgender is to be perceived as ugly. And I know that is not true intellectually, but I can't help but internalize those messages we see constantly in our popular culture and politics and really throughout daily life. And it has been a journey for me to get to that place to truly understand that trans is beautiful, that transgender people enrich and enhance the diversity of our country and our community, not just in our experiences, but that we are a beautiful part of the tapestry of humanity. And it was that first instance of I was finally being seen. This one part of my identity was finally being seen, my identity as a woman, but I also wanted that other part of my identity to be seen. And now everyone knows. So there's no way for that not to be seen.
Everyone knows about me too, so I know exactly how you feel. Exactly how you feel. This is going to be our last question, and then we're going to do some audience questions. Is that how we're going to do this? Or
I think so, yeah.
Okay. All right, and when it comes to supporting the LGBTQ equality, I've heard you say that equality is not a social or a luxury issue. And you've also said we have to be accomplices rather than just allies. What I want to know is, for all the people, cisgender, all the people, what can we do? First of all, what do you mean by being an accomplice rather than an ally? And what can we do to further the cause for LGBTQ people?
Well, I think, on the first part of your question, so often in our politics and in our discourse, we fall into this notion of political issues being binary, economic issues and social issues. And I think we have to move past that sort of outdated understanding of political issues, because every issue is an economic issue, and every issue is a social justice issue. You cannot build an economy that works for everyone if any single person is kept out of that economy because of prejudice or stigma or discrimination. But you also can't have equality for everyone if you have an economy that is rigged for those at the top. And so we have to move past these oppressive notions of our politics where we separate these issues. Because at the end of the day, people need change on all fronts. As Audre Lorde says, there's no such thing as a single issue cause because no one lives single issue lives. And people have to understand that we cannot deprioritize issues that are deemed social issues. These are issues of economics. These are issues about jobs in the economy. And for a lot of us, these are issues of life and death. And so we need people to make clear with their vote and with their voice that these issues matter. These issues matter to me, they matter to the people I love, they matter to my community, that I am going to act and vote based on these issues. And so when I say we need accomplices and not just allies, I mean we need people to put something on the line. That might be your comfort. That might be the comfort of other people. That might mean putting your money where your mouth is. It might mean speaking out when the easier path is to keep quiet. But the only way change happens, the only way we can build a world where every person is treated with dignity and fairness, is if every single person puts something on the line, speaks out when there is injustice. Not just big instances of injustice like HB2, but also little moments of indignity. Because it is the little moments of indignity that end up adding up into injustice, oppression, bigotry, discrimination, and in some cases, violence. So that means if you hear a comment, if you hear a joke, even if it seems like you're being a Debbie Downer, say something. If it means that you see a place where policies aren't totally inclusive, say something. It means when politicians come for us, coming for them on election day. It means saying to our elected officials who might be pro-equality, that we don't just expect you to vote the right way, but we expect you to be champions of equality. We need people to put something on the line. We need people to show up. We need people to make clear that they will not sit by while any person, whether they're a politician, a citizen, a coworker, a classmate, when anyone treats anyone with anything less than total dignity and fairness.
So I think Sarah's willing to take some questions from the audience.
Absolutely.
So Kelly over there with one mic, I've got one. If you want to raise your hand if you have a question, I got one back
Don't
here.
be shy.
Um,
Hi, my name is Julian, and I'm actually a graduate of charter, but I took a lot of classes at
I'll forgive
Cab.
you. It's okay. It's okay.
Thank
This is a
you.
safe space for charter students.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I came out 4 years ago when I was a junior at charter, but I didn't start living my truth until I came to college. And seeing you when I came to college in 2016, that fall was an amazing moment for me. As a trans person, as someone from Delaware, as someone who went to school just above you many years later. Not that many, but a couple years later. And like, I am pursuing a path that is quite similar to yours. I'm not saying I want your job, but I want your job.
You're hired.
So do you have any advice for me and for other trans people that wish to follow in your footsteps?
Well, first off, thank you for sharing that with all of us, and thank you for being you. It is an honor to meet you, and I'm excited to meet you afterwards and hopefully give you a hug if you're comfortable. You know, I think there are two things that I would say. The first is that, you know, I went to college in DC, so when I was in college, we were the most politically active campus in the entire country, but everyone was totally focused on interning on the Hill and the White House. Everyone was ignoring the change that was right in front of them. The most formative experiences I have not been my experiences advocating with the Human Rights Campaign nationally. It has been through local change and state change. It has been through making change that's right in front of me. Those are the experiences that have taught me how to do my job, hopefully well, at the national level. But I think so often we get caught up in the headlines, we get caught up in the national conversation, and we forget that at the end of the day, change doesn't come from Washington, it comes from communities and states across this country changing their laws and changing hearts. And so one of the things that we must never do is we must never lose sight of the change that's right in front of us, that people need change, whether it's 10 people, whether it's 15 people, whether it's 5,000 students on a campus, whether it's 900,000 people in the state of Delaware. People need change right in front of us, and the only way we can change the country is if we change our communities, if we change our schools, if we change our state. And the second is that, sort of in line with that, you know, when I was younger, I wanted to be president of the United States. I had all of these goals and all of these dreams, and I think one of the things that I began to learn in college was that you can make plans, you can be focused on a 10-year plan where you go from job to job to job, but at the end of the day, and I was actually just talking with a friend about this yesterday, the only way to actually progress and to get the kind of jobs you truly want in the long term is to do a good job in the near term, is to focus on the job that you have right in front of you and do it as best you can. People will not necessarily respond positively if they can tell that you're looking for that next career or that next job. Focus on the job that you have right in front of you. Advocate for yourself, have dreams and ambitions, but focus on that job right in front of you, and you'll do a good job. People will respond to that degree of commitment, and I think opportunities come from that. And so they sort of go hand in hand. Don't ignore the change in front of you, and then when you are making that change, put your all into it. Don't think about what comes down the road. Put your all into that change. Great question. Oh, yeah. As we get another question, just as a reminder, there is a wonderful individual outside from Barnes & Noble who is selling books, and I will be happy to sign all books right after the event.
Good evening.
Oh,
It's back here.
hello.
Hi. Thank you so much. That's so inspirational. Your journey it inspires so many people. My name is Jimmy May, and both my kids, Jameson May and Isabella Siren, have attended school here, and they're also, along with you, alumni of Elementary Workshop.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So,
Go EW.
But here's my question is a follow-up to your comment about the role of communities in doing what's here and now, and recognizing what can be done. And it's also in the back of your remark about being proud about being a Delawarean. Kathy, my wife, and I have raised our kids here. We've lived for 28 years now. But Delaware doesn't have, or also has a distinction that I'm wondering what your thoughts are about. It's one of only 2 states in the country without either an equal protection clause in its constitution, nor an equal rights amendment in its constitution that recognizes and protects gender equality, both for the trans and cisgender community. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that lapse in Delaware's legal protections. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for folks who aren't familiar, there's been a debate in Dover around a constitutional amendment that would add sort of Delaware's version of an equal rights amendment to our state's constitution to ensure that there is equal protection in Delaware under our constitution for people based on sex. And I think one of the things that's really important is that when we're talking about LGBTQ equality, all of this falls under the umbrella of sex discrimination or gender equity. Because at the end of the day, homophobia and transphobia is rooted in the exact same prejudice as misogyny and sexism. The notion that one perception at birth should dictate who you are, how you act, who you love, and what you do. So as an LGBTQ advocate, but also as a Delawarean, as a woman, I'm incredibly in favor of adding the Equal Rights Amendment to Delaware's Constitution. Our Constitution should reflect the values of our state, and I can't think of a value that should be more central to who we are as a state than the notion of equality for everyone, no matter their gender. You also raise a point, and I meant to talk about this, but beyond the ERA, there's also been a debate in this state around protections for all students, including transgender students, in our public and charter schools in Delaware. There was a regulation that was proposed by the Department of Education that's elicited a lot of debate. And I encourage all of you, as that debate continues, when there are opportunities to express your support for protections for all students, including transgender students, to make your voice heard. Because at the end of the day, 2 things remain. Even with the attacks from the Trump administration, Delaware still is legally obligated under Title IX to protect transgender students from discrimination. 2, even if that weren't the case, every single student deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. They deserve to be protected from discrimination, and they deserve to make sure that the school will never put them in a situation where they are at risk of discrimination or abuse or violence, whether at home or in school. And so we need people to stand up. Deb Heffernan, I think, is maybe here. I don't know. I thought I saw Deb in the audience. Maybe not. But Deb Heffernan has been a leader in the State House on that. And as that debate continues, we need people to speak out because, frankly, the nasty voices, the hateful voices, were the loudest, and they certainly reflect the need for those types of protections. So thank you for that question.
Hi. That was loud. Hi.
Hello. Hello.
Hi. Hi. My name is Anna. I'm a 7th grader at Cab, and I'm gay, and I'm very open about it. And one side of my family's like super cool with it, and the other side of my family's like super not cool with it. And like a lot of people on the side of my family that's like not cool with it make comments like, oh, I liked you better when you were straight, and I'm just like, oh, okay. So I'm very like accepting of myself, and I'm very glad that I am who I am, and I wouldn't change myself, and I keep telling myself that like when I'm with that side of the family, but then they keep like putting me down, and they're like, no. Do you have any advice for someone like me that's in a difficult situation where like I'm super accepting of myself, but when I'm around a certain group of people, I'm not?
Well, first off, thank you for sharing that with all of us, and thank you for asking that question. And I'm sorry that there are people in your life and in your family that aren't as accepting as they should be. I think there's what I said to Mr. Maz, I think is true here, which is that you are the best judge of how you should respond in those circumstances. And if you don't feel like putting up a fight, if you don't feel like being out and proud in those circumstances because it's just too difficult, that's okay. It's okay. It's a lot to have to constantly bear that burden. It's a lot to have to constantly argue with people, including your loved ones, about your basic humanity. And so it's okay for you sometimes to just take a rest. What I will say is that when I talk to people who aren't being particularly respectful, who are doing things that hurt me, I think our instinct is to try to sort of puff out our chest and try to present as strong, maybe reason with them. I think at the end of the day, if we go to them and we say, what you were saying, I know you're not intending it for it to be mean. I know you probably think it's coming from a good place, but it really hurts me. I think if we go and we are vulnerable, if we express our pain, it's not going to help in every circumstance. It's not going to change every person's actions. But I do think if we go to people and we are vulnerable and we say, this hurts, you are causing me pain, particularly when we can do it face to face with them, their empathy and their compassion will win out. Because at the end of the day, people know what it feels like to be hurt. They know what it feels like to be mocked, regardless of whether they're LGBTQ or not. They don't want it for themselves, and hopefully they don't want it for other people. So I think in a very calm but very forceful way, it is always so important to begin a conversation and say, what you're saying, it really is hurting me. And I hope in most cases, most people will respond with compassion, with kindness, and with empathy, and understand that they shouldn't cause anyone else pain. So thank you again for that question, and I hope I can give you a hug afterwards too.
Hi, Sarah. My name is Cora Castle. And first, I want to thank you for your voice. Obviously, you're amazing, owing to all these people here to listen to you. I do have a question about the trajectory of the LGB movement and the vehicles that have propelled that movement, and your opinion about how those vehicles work and or don't work for the trans movement. And I mean, are we going to get there in the same vehicle?
Well, that's a great question. And I think there's a multi-pronged response to that. But I think at the end of the day, there are always questions about whether we should be an LGBTQ movement or whether we should split. And I am of the firm belief, as I addressed in a previous question, that you cannot combat transphobia unless you also combat homophobia. And you cannot combat homophobia unless you combat transphobia. Because all of us in the LGBTQ community, the prejudice and stigma we face is based on the fact that we are all, as a friend of mine says, gender outlaws, right? We are all deviating from traditional notions of gender, from gender stereotypes. And when Laverne Cox says it best, when she was a child on the playground, the word she was called was not the T word, it was the F word. The fight for gay rights is inextricably linked with the fight for trans rights and vice versa. And so I think as a principle and as a matter of strategy, You cannot totally separate the two, that our movement has to be one. Now, historically, a lot of the structures within the LGBTQ movement have not worked properly for the trans community. They've left us behind, they've ignored us, they've used us as political pawns in negotiating legislation. But one of the things that I think we've seen over the last 10 years is a new generation of leadership throughout these organizations, throughout the movement, that recognizes that people within our community, particularly those who are most marginalized, are not bargaining chips. And that the only way for us to achieve equality for any single person in our community is for us to achieve equality for every single person in our community, from the gay Muslim refugee, to the queer transgender immigrant, to the transgender woman of color living right here in Wilmington, Delaware, until all of us are treated with dignity and fairness. I think there is important space for trans-specific and trans-led organizations like National Center for Transgender Equality. I think Mara Kiesling is an incredible human being, and she's sort of my trans parent, my mentor in advocacy in the trans movement. I think NCTE is an important voice and addition to the table. I think it is an important addition to the infrastructure of our movement. But I also think that we should have a larger seat at the broader LGBTQ organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, which, again, as I'm sure you know and probably were alluding to, has a history up through 2007 of not always standing up for the trans community in the most forceful and principled ways. And I think if we have more trans leadership, more trans voices within those spaces, we can ensure that they are working at their maximum effectiveness and with maximum commitment to trans equality. And I will say that as someone working at the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization, that the commitment, passion, and skill behind the work of my colleagues at HRC is unmatched. And I know for a fact here in Delaware, we would have never passed our gender identity non-discrimination bill had it not been for HRC and organizations like NCTE and the National LGBTQ Task Force. So I think there's a place, I think particularly with more voices at the table, making sure that those organizations are reflective of the full diversity of our community and therefore able to address the full scope of needs of our community. You know, I think at the end of the day, you know, we have seen an incredible transformation on marriage equality. But I do also think that that transformation as a country on marriage equality has helped the trans community for multiple reasons. The first is that trans people, 60 to 70% of them identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer, right? So you can't separate gay rights from most trans people's lives. But the second reason is that I think this country evolved in such a way and associates marriage equality with the LGBTQ community and then the LGBTQ community with the trans community. And because of that, people are approaching issues of trans equality. And they're saying, you know what, I may not understand this, I may not be able to wrap my mind around it, but I was wrong on marriage, and I don't want to be wrong again. And so I do think that there has been a tangible impact to the community on issues of marriage equality. I think there's been a tangible benefit to the trans community of the progress on gay, lesbian, bisexual, and queer rights. And I think we are already seeing those broader LGBTQ movement organizations working on our behalf, and I think that'll only continue as we continue to diversify. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take
One more
last
question.
so that Sarah has time to sign all
Oh my
of
God,
those
my brother
books.
just raised his hand.
Oh, all right, two questions. We're going to go right here.
Oh, that was not a reason to call on him.
Hi, Sarah. I'm glad to be with you tonight.
Hello.
Earlier this evening, we were addressed as ladies and gentlemen. Another gender outlaw is those who do not identify with either gender, who are non-binary. I'm a church pastor, and so I've learned to not talk about my brothers and sisters, but about my friends and neighbors. So I wondered if you have any experience, and would you please just speak about that? I don't have a specific question, but just have you had experience?
Yeah, and that's a great question and a great point to raise. right now we are finally accepting the full diversity of gender identities that exists in this world. I think when people think about transgender issues and transgender identities, they oftentimes think of transgender men and transgender women. But there are a growing number, particularly young people, a growing number of folks who are identifying outside of the gender binary. And just as with practically everything in nature, things don't come in just black and white. People can identify as men, they can identify as women, and yes, they can identify as something outside of that binary. And one of the most important things for us in the LGBTQ movement is to not waste time in amplifying the stories, voices, and needs of non-binary individuals, because as we, I think, have seen when it comes to the trans rights movement, if we wait to tell stories, if we wait to educate, we're going to end up finding ourselves in a worse position 10 years down the road when the new boogeymen or the new boogie people end up being non-binary folks in this fight. And so I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we are amplifying the voices and stories of non-binary people, and I encourage all of us to take the time, another way of being an accomplice, spending some time reading about non-binary identities, reading about non-binary people, because I gotta be honest, I feel like my life has been so enriched by non-binary folks in my life. The way these non-binary colleagues and friends of mine have challenged our notions of gender, our understandings of gender, I think will not just free them from the constraints of the gender binary, but will free all of us from the constraints of the gender binary, even if we do identify as men or women. So it's an important issue. These are identities that we need to make sure we're respecting, and I think the story of our movement, the story of our community, and the story of our country is bringing in people who for too long have been ignored or been in the shadows. And it is past time for us to do that with non-binary people.
You ready to take a question from your brother?
Sure, I guess.
How are you?
Dan. Hello, Daniel.
I was actually going to tell you a story about something that happened to me today after all this ended, but you're giving out 50,000 hugs, and it's past my bedtime, so I figured maybe I could tell you the story right now, and,
Sure.
and you got to help me because you got to fill in some of the details. And it was a conversation I had with Greg Patterson, who I work with. He's the chief of staff for the Attorney
Good
General,
guy.
Matt Dent. And today, Greg pulled me aside, and he told me about an event that you attended that I think he set up down in Dover.
Yeah, Youth in Government, the
Okay.
YMCA Youth in Government program.
And maybe you can explain that a little bit. I took it as high school kids that are hugely politically active go down to Dover and pretend to be a legislator for the day.
That's basically it, yeah.
Okay. And Greg has a daughter who was in the program, right?
Yes.
So he pulls me aside and he asked me if I talked to you about it, and I said briefly, and he said, I want to tell you a story about what happened. I told all these kids that Sarah McBride might be coming, and you thought Elvis was coming to town. And he says they all brought their books, they were so excited, it was the highlight of their day, and that apparently you showed up for lunch, and they weren't quite sure that you were even going to come for lunch.
Dinner, yeah.
Dinner. And Greg told me he's sitting next to his daughter. He knows you're coming to the dinner. He didn't tell the other kids necessarily that you were going to be coming to eat with them. And that you walked into that restaurant or cafeteria or whatever it was, and then he said it was like the Beatles walked into the building. And that the kids were just starstruck, sort of, and that impressed and treated you like a celebrity. And Greg said, tell Sarah thank you because I'm now so much cooler in his daughter's eyes for producing Sarah McBride at this dinner. And I just want to say thank you for making me that much cooler to one of my bosses. And
I did not pay him to tell this story.
yeah. So, you know, your rock star or role model status is amazing. I just want to say I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And that can I be Ringo and you can be John or Paul or whoever you want to be. I'll just be Ringo. And but just wanted to let you know you've changed my life incredibly. And I just couldn't be any more prouder. I just really couldn't. So thanks again.
when I came out, Dan was upstairs with my dad, and my mom rushed upstairs, and she said, "Go ahead, tell them what you just told me." And I came out as transgender. My oldest brother, Sean, is gay, and so Danny proudly announced to our family that he was heterosexual. I mean, I don't know what to say. I am so proud of the journey of our family. When I came out, my mother said to me, and she said to my brother Sean, "What are the chances? What are the chances that I have a gay son and a transgender child?" And my hope was that my mom could ask that question, what are the chances, not out of self-pity, but out of pride in the diversity of our family, out of pride in the strength of our family. And to watch not just her, but our family go on this journey, you and Dad and Mom and Sean and Jamie and Blake, to go on this journey. If there's nothing else that gives me hope at the end of the day, it's that I have seen that when good people come with an open heart and an open mind, they can transform from a place of ignorance and shock to a place of passionate support. And I just want you to know I'm so proud to be your sister, and I'm so excited for your wedding. He's getting married in 2 weeks. Thank you all very much.
To everyone in the audience, Sarah will be out front. Purchase your books. Thank you. She wants those mics back. I shut them off. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. How did it go? Did anybody film this?